Kevin had just exposed the con man who was trying to sell a fake gold and pearl necklace to Phoebe. He was able to stop him from running out by throwing a box at his leg, knocking him to the ground. Phoebe ordered her guards, "Call the police and have him taken to the police station." Everyone immediately surrounded McKay. Grant pointed an accusatory finger at him and yelled, "You're selling fakes? I can't believe I almost fell for it." However, as he turned around to leave, Kevin had already blocked his path. "What's with you? The thief is over there. Why are you stopping me?" Grant complained. This made everyone turn around. "Why are you in such a hurry to leave? Aren't you going to take your partner along?" Kevin said with a sneer. "I assure you I'm a legitimate businessman," Grant said in a haughty voice as he tried to go around Kevin and head for the door. But Kevin suddenly grabbed Grant's wrist. "Your acting skills aren't that great either," Kevin said to him. "Can't you see that I'm a victim too?" Grant pleaded. He struggled hard but found that Kevin's hand was like a steel clamp, tightly gripping his wrist. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't break free. They all heard sirens in the street and looked out the front window. Kevin had just sent an urgent text message to Officer Emmett. The police lieutenant walked directly to Kevin and asked, "Where are the suspects?" "One is here and the other is over there," Kevin pointed at McKay and Grant. "Officer, don't listen to him. I just came in here to shop for antiques. If he tells you anything else, he's a liar," Grant said. The antique dealers from the neighboring shops pulled McKay over to Emmett. One of them said, "Officer, Mr. Grant is telling the truth. We're all witnesses." He paused and continued, "He's framing Mr. Grant to make himself look good and impress President Anderson." Kevin couldn't believe how misguided these men were. How could they have fallen for this nonsense? Officer Emmett looked disappointed. She turned to look at Phoebe, who was standing next to her. "Miss Anderson, do you think this person is involved in the crime?" Phoebe didn't know what to say, so she just shook her head. Emmett sighed a little and turned to look back at Kevin. She informed him, "Since none of the witnesses say that he was involved, I have no choice but to let him go." Kevin couldn't believe that someone with Officer Emmett's experience couldn't see through the deception. He was about to give up and let go of Grant's arm when he noticed that there seemed to be something wrong with the man's face. He reached out and pulled on Grant's skin. Everyone was shocked to see him standing there, holding the man's face in his hand. Well, it was actually a mask, and the nasty face that underneath was pretty frightening. "So it's you!" Emmett exclaimed as she tightly grabbed onto Grant's collar. Kevin looked at her in surprise. "You know him?" Emmett nodded and explained. "Half a year ago, a rich Chicago art collector was swindled out of a painting worth about $250,000. We've been following leads ever since, but couldn't find a trace of suspects." "It was them?" Kevin asked her. "Yes, it's them." Emmett nodded again. "They have a unique approach, using various disguises to trick their victims." A few backup officers entered the store to help, and Emmett ordered them to pull the mask from McKay's face. It was made of very realistic artificial skin, very convincing to say the least. "Kevin, thank you for helping us catch these two criminals. You've made a great contribution," Officer Emmett said happily. Kevin smiled and shrugged his shoulders. Then he glanced at the owners of the antique shops. The ones who had been speaking in Grant's defense were especially embarrassed. They were staring at Kevin in surprise. The masks on Grant and McKay's faces were so realistic that nobody noticed anything unusual. But how did Kevin see through the deception? As the prisoners were being escorted to the squad cars, Officer Emmett suddenly asked Kevin, "I'm very curious. How did you see that they were wearing masks?" "To tell you the truth, it was Grant's fault. When he struggled, the edge of his mask curled up. Pretty careless of him," Kevin said casually. Officer Emmett had some doubts about his explanation. Grant had disguised himself incredibly well. The mask and his entire face were really convincing. But Kevin could actually see the tiny gap in the slightly raised corner at a glance. "When did my eyesight get so good?" Kevin thought to himself. "In any case, I owe you my thanks. When I have the time, I'll treat you to dinner." After Officer Emmett said this, she headed out to her squad car and drove away. The owners of the neighborhood antique shops also left. Phoebe slowly walked up to Kevin and said a very sincere, "Thank you." "No need to thank me. It was my pleasure," Kevin said with a smile. When Phoebe heard him say this, a faint smile appeared on her face. "By the way, I could tell from your discussion of the pearls that you know a lot about the subject. Have you had any formal training in antique appraisal?" Kevin thought for a second and said, "I used to know an old gentleman who taught me a lot about antiques." What Kevin didn't expect was that Phoebe would suddenly become so excited to hear this. She asked him, "Are you still in touch with him? Do you know his name and address?" Phoebe gave Kevin a hopeful look. She wondered how he had been able to see through the deception at a single glance. He obviously knew things that she didn't. Phoebe figured that his teacher must be even more knowledgeable. "I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I haven't seen him in a very long time. I have no idea where he is," Kevin said apologetically. Phoebe let out a disappointed sigh. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Kevin, can I ask you for a favor?" "Just name it, Phoebe. As long as it's something I can help with, I'll do my best," Kevin said straightforwardly. "I want to invite you to be the chief antique appraiser for Anderson Fine Jewelry and Antiques," she said. Phoebe seemed to be afraid that Kevin would refuse, so she quickly added, "You don't have to come to work every day, but if I need your help, I'll expect you to come in. I can give you a salary of $150,000 a year for your effort. Would that be okay?" Phoebe was nervous because she didn't know if he'd be interested, but at the moment, Kevin was the most insightful expert she knew. Mr. Landau, who was standing nearby, gasped when he heard this. He had worked for the Andersons for over 10 years, but he barely made a third of that salary. If Kevin was only going to be a part-time consultant, why would his salary be so high? On the other hand, Mr. Landau had witnessed Kevin's profound knowledge and insight, so he couldn't disagree with the decision to hire him. He was envious of Kevin's offer, but felt that he deserved his good fortune. "Let me get this straight. I don't need to come into work every day and I'll earn $150,000 a year. Why would I say no to that offer?" Kevin agreed right away. He felt that it was getting late, so he said goodbye to Phoebe and headed back to the office, carrying the tiara in his bag. That night, Kevin went home to his new apartment. He sent a message to Lily, showered, and went to bed. The next morning, as soon as Kevin arrived at his office, Miss Wilson came in to give him a report on the company's activities. "Mr. Williams, today is the premiere of Brittany Davis's show, the one that the Jones family took the lead on. Do you want to attend?" she asked him. "I won't be able to attend. If I go, it may affect Brittany's performance. If you can set up the live feed, I'll just watch it here at my desk," Kevin explained. He was well aware that Brittany's deal had been set up by the Jones family. Moreover, Lily was personally responsible for it. If he appeared in front of his wife, his true identity would certainly be exposed. "I understand, sir," Miss Wilson replied. Then she left to make the arrangements for him. A while later, the live feed was set up on his computer and Kevin watched Brittany slowly walk on the stage. He noticed that you could hear a lot of noise from the audience, which made it hard to appreciate Brittany's performance. Then, when Brittany was halfway through her song, there was a problem with her microphone. The crowd began to boo. As the sound engineers were trying to fix it, Brittany stomped her feet angrily and turned around to go backstage. Kevin slammed his fist on his desk and called Miss Wilson in. "What's going on over there?" he asked her. "I have no idea, sir. I'll go find out right away," Miss Wilson replied. Then she left the room and went to her desk to make a call. Kevin looked in astonishment at the dent that he just made in his desk with his fist. He stared at the deep indentation and wondered, how did I get so damn strong? Just then, Miss Wilson hung up her phone. Kevin grabbed a few documents and used them to cover his desk so that she wouldn't see what he'd done. "Sir, I have an update on the show. There are 4 engineers in charge of Brittany's sound equipment backstage. Unfortunately, they've all made a mess of the production," Miss Wilson explained. When Kevin heard this, he understood immediately and said, "Please call them to my office." "Right away, sir." Miss Wilson also had some suspicions, so she was glad that Kevin had made this request. After she left, Kevin immediately picked up his phone and called Mitchell Cook. "Hi, Mitch. I'm in my office at the Williams building. I need some help with a few things. You think you can come downtown?" A little over a half an hour later, the 4 staff members who had screwed up Brittany's show entered the CEO's office and saw Mitchell Cook sitting in Kevin's office chair smoking a cigar. There were several men in black suits and sunglasses on either side of him. Kevin could have easily gotten the 4 of them to talk, but he didn't want to expose his identity.
So, I understand you're all sound engineers. Were you just working backstage at Brittany's show? Well, what I'd like to understand is what the hell happened to our star performer's microphone? Cook asked sternly as he blew a smoke ring toward the ceiling. Kevin, who was standing with Cook's bodyguard, shook his head when he saw the 4 of them. Cat's got your tongue? Do you know who I am? He asked with a sneer. I'm Mitchell Cook. If you dare lie to me, I guarantee there will be consequences. When they heard his name, the 4 unlucky sound engineers were quaking in their boots. Everyone knew about Cook's reputation throughout Chicago. After about a minute of this staring contest, one of them couldn't take the pressure and he stammered, "As long as you don't hurt me, I'll tell you whatever you want to know." The other 3 men looked at each other and started to cooperate too. A few minutes later, Cook ended the impromptu meeting and waved them out of the room. Then Cook stood up and smiled, saying, "Kevin, everything is clear to me now." "Why, that's amazing, Mr. Cook. I didn't realize you were so well known around here," Kevin teased. "No need to thank me, Kevin. If it wasn't for your help, I wouldn't be so successful right now." After saying this, Cook said with a hint of curiosity in his voice, "Kevin, there's one thing I don't understand. Now that you're the head of Williams Media, why are you still staying in the Jones family?" "I have my reasons, Mitch. Let's drop the subject for now," Kevin answered. After a few more minutes of small talk, Kevin asked Miss Wilson to walk Cook back to the elevator. Then he let her know that if Williams Media needed any hotels in the future, they should put the Whistler Hotel at the top of the list. After Cook left, Kevin's phone rang. Dorothy's voice blared in Kevin's earpiece. "You're a real piece of work. You haven't been home in days. Do you have any idea what just happened? Hurry up and meet us at the Jones mansion." Actually, Dorothy didn't want to see Kevin. It was Grandma Jones who had ordered everyone in the Jones family to come right away. She was furious. "All right, I'll be right there," Kevin responded. Then he hung up the phone and rushed over to the Jones mansion. Of course, he knew what this call was about. While waiting at a stoplight, Kevin called Brittany. At that very moment, Brittany was in her room crying about the disaster at her show. There were tears flowing down her face, and she was heartbroken. When she saw that Kevin was calling, Brittany answered very politely and nervously, "Mr. Williams, I'm sorry. I just don't know how this happened." The botched show had ruined her image, erasing all of her previous success, and the company suffered an enormous loss. So Brittany assumed that Kevin was calling to chew her out. "No need to apologize. I've already sent someone to investigate this matter. This has nothing to do with you. It looks like it's an internal problem in the Jones family," Kevin said with a sigh. "Oh, Mr. Williams, is this true?" Brittany asked in surprise. "Don't ask any more questions right now. Miss Wilson will send you an email later and I'll need you to do exactly as I say," Kevin instructed her. When Kevin hung up the phone, he'd just arrived at the Jones mansion. As he walked in the room, Kevin saw that the entire Jones family was standing in the main reception room. Grandma Jones, who was sitting on a chair, had a gloomy expression on her face. Since the Jones family was in charge of the project, they assumed that Williams Media would blame them for a disastrous show. When they saw Kevin walk in, they all looked displeased. They didn't know why she'd asked him to come to their meeting. What use could he be? Had he just come to poke fun at them? Suddenly, Jason stood up and pointed at Lily. He sneered and said, "Lily, it wasn't easy for our family to set up the deal with Williams Media. You screwed everything up, so now it's up to you to tell Grandma how to fix it." "I'm sorry, Grandma," Lily said sadly. Without waiting for Grandma Jones to reply, Jason interrupted and said, "What's the use of being sorry? Are you just looking for Grandma's pity? Whether you're sorry or not, Williams Media is going to blame us for your blunder." Then Jason turned his head to look at Grandma Jones and continued, "Grandma, I think Lily did a terrible job. In order to keep something like this from happening again, I suggest you pull her out of all her duties in the company. That way she won't be able to interfere in our business anymore. We can't let Williams Media hold us responsible for her incompetence."
One of the younger members of the family said, "That's right, Grandma. What Jason said makes sense." Another one commented,
"Lily really blew it. I think this would be a good way to punish her for her failure."
Everyone around him nodded in approval. Grandma Jones looked around the room and then looked at Lily. She coldly said, "Then it's agreed. From this moment on, you will have no say in the company's affairs." When Lily heard this, her face instantly turned pale. She wanted to explain but just couldn't find the words. Kevin had been watching all of this from the sidelines. What could he do to help without revealing his true identity to Lily? Just as Grandma Jones finished speaking, Kevin stepped forward and declared loudly, "I disagree." Everyone in the room burst into laughter.
"Did I hear that right? He actually disagreed?"
they were asking each other. One of the older members of the Jones family said,
"Just because you know the owner of the Whistler Hotel and the president of West Chicago International, don't let it go to your head."
One of Lily's aunts agreed. "That's right. Since when do you have a voice in our private business?" They all looked at Kevin like he was a bonehead. "What did you just say?" Grandma Jones asked sternly. "I said I object," Kevin sneered and added. "As for the problems with Brittany's show, you should investigate what really happened before listening to Jason's nonsense and putting all of the blame on my wife." "So, do you believe we're being unfair to Lily?" Grandma Jones asked. "After you look into it, you'll find out what a huge mistake you've made," Kevin replied calmly. Just as Grandma Jones was about to say something, Jason interrupted.
"Kevin, you really have some nerve. Take a look around. None of us want to hear what you have to say,"
Jason said disdainfully. "I just want Grandma to investigate this matter further. Why would that bother you?" Kevin looked Jason in the eyes and asked him, "Does this have something to do with you?" A strange look flashed across Jason's eyes and he sneered.
"What right do you have to question my involvement?"
"Then how can you be so sure that this must be my wife's responsibility?" Kevin noticed something in Jason's reaction and he asked him seriously, "Could it be that this whole mess really is your fault?" Jason looked at Kevin awkwardly. Just as he was about to attack Kevin physically, he remembered what had happened at Grandma Jones's birthday party and he lost his nerve. Kevin took advantage of Jason's hesitation and said, "I don't care who caused all the trouble behind the scenes at Brittany's show. All I know is my wife is innocent." Kevin's intent was obvious and they all knew what he meant. However, nobody was willing to agree without some solid evidence.
"I think you're deliberately looking to start trouble. Don't talk nonsense,"
Jason shot back as he clenched his fists.
"Remember, you're not a true member of the Jones family and you have no say here."
"I didn't say you did it, Jason. Why are you getting so worked up?" Kevin replied as he looked deep into his eyes. Suddenly, Grandma Jones slapped the table hard. She had been very unhappy to see Kevin show up for the meeting, but because of his close ties to Cook and President Wright, she didn't say anything. But he was causing a lot of trouble for her favorite grandson in front of the entire family. She couldn't take any more of it. "Kevin, if you plan to say another word about this, you can get the hell out of here right now," Grandma Jones said callously. Seeing Grandma getting so angry, most of the Joneses were curious to see how this would play out. Lily, who looked very worried, walked over to Kevin and tugged on his sleeve. "Grandma's getting upset. Please stop, Kevin. This isn't getting us anywhere." Dorothy walked up to them and said, "Kevin, you're only causing trouble. What gives you the right to open your big mouth here?" First, Kevin looked at Dorothy, who was obviously irate. Then he looked at the rest of the Jones family surrounding him. Finally, his gaze stopped on Lily. Taking a deep breath, Kevin patted Lily's shoulder and calmly stepped aside. "Okay, everyone, get back to work," Grandma Jones ordered. Then she said, "Jason, go and discuss this with Williams Media. Try to minimize the impact on our company."
"Okay, Grandma,"
Jason replied as he gave Lily a scornful look. Just as the Joneses were about to leave, they heard a charming voice from the mansion's foyer. May I ask if Grandma Jones is here? Everyone looked over and saw a beautiful woman slowly walking into the room. Grandma Jones recognized Brittany at a glance and her face fell. She subconsciously believed that Brittany was there to accuse them. But she forced a smile and asked, "Why, Brittany, what brings you here today? You should have let us know you were coming, so we could have prepared a proper welcome for you." "Why, thank you, Grandma Jones," Brittany replied with a polite nod. "Please have a seat," Grandma Jones offered with a smile. "I'm sorry, but I prefer to remain standing," Brittany said graciously. She had already seen Kevin standing in the crowd and felt a little uneasy about the situation. Grandma Jones spoke to her in a serene voice. "Miss Davis, please don't be angry. The problems at the show were all our fault and it will cost us dearly. Rest assured that I've already taught Lily a lesson. She's been pulled from all our company projects." When Brittany heard this, she turned to look at Lily. Lily could barely make eye contact. Even though she knew she was innocent, she was starting to believe that everything was her fault. As everyone watched, Brittany slowly walked over to her. "Please don't blame yourself, Lily. I've already looked into this, and it isn't your fault at all." Everyone was stunned to hear this. Some of them immediately remembered what Kevin had said. They couldn't help but look over at Jason. "Brittany, are you sure?" Lily asked in disbelief. "Yes, Lily, it's the truth," Brittany reassured her. Grandma Jones was also a little stunned and asked her, "Miss Davis, can you be more specific about what happened?" Brittany slowly turned around and looked directly at Jason, who was standing off to the side. When Jason met Brittany's gaze, he got a strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. He wondered, could she have found out that I'm responsible for all of this? Just as Jason was trying to figure out what to do, Brittany turned and shouted towards the door. "You guys can come in now. Tell Grandma Jones everything that happened. We have to clear Lily's name." They all saw the 4 Williams Media sound engineers walk in slowly, looking incredibly guilty. Jason was frantic, but he forced himself to look calm. "Why haven't you told Grandma Jones about any of this?" Brittany snapped. One of the Williams employees pointed right at Jason and shouted, "It's him! It was Jason Jones who ordered us to do it." The second one added, "That's right. He gave us $75,000 each to sabotage Brittany's microphone." The third employee finally spoke up and said, "Mr. Jones also said that he would give us each another $75,000 after it was done." The last one was too afraid to speak, but instead just stared at Jason and nodded in agreement. The entire Jones family was now glaring at Jason. Because Brittany was there, he tried not to curse. "Stop slandering me, you bastards! I've never seen any of you guys before," Jason screamed hysterically. "Don't you know who I am? Do you know what the consequences will be for trying to frame me like this?" Grandma Jones turned to look at Brittany and asked her gently, "Are you sure what they've said is true? This is a very serious matter and I can't let my grandson be wrongly accused." Kevin shook his head in disbelief. He really didn't understand what Grandma Jones was thinking. How come she refused to believe Brittany and these 4 men? "We're telling the truth," the 4th employee blurted out. "I still have a record of the bank transfer. I haven't moved a single cent of the money he gave me." As he spoke, one of his partners took out his phone and shouted, "I've got proof too." "Don't try to put all the blame on us," said another one as he also pulled out his phone. They knew what kind of man Jason was. However, they decided they'd rather face Jason's wrath than have to explain themselves to Mitchell Cook. Jason was furious. He stared at them as they stood there holding out their phones. "Jason, are you really responsible for all this?" Grandma Jones looked very upset. Jason didn't know what to say to her. Suddenly, Kevin nudged Lily's shoulder and asked her mischievously, "How are you doing? You feel any better now?" "Shut up," Lily scowled, but she was definitely relieved. After a while, Grandma Jones took a deep breath and looked at Brittany awkwardly. "You'll have to forgive Jason. He's young and foolish. If you want to blame someone, blame me for not teaching him better." Even though the evidence was right in front of her eyes, Grandma Jones was still defending Jason out of love for her grandson. "I understand, Grandma Jones. It's all right," she replied. "I just came here to make sure that Lily wouldn't be wrongly accused." But Brittany still had a sad look in her eyes. Grandma Jones seemed to understand what she meant. Then she turned to look at her favorite grandson. "I'm disappointed in you, Jason. I've obviously been too easy on you. How could you do such a terrible thing? As of right now, I forbid you to be involved in our family business, and I also forbid you to leave the property for 1 year. If you do, there will be serious consequences." On the outside, Jason was incredibly arrogant, but he could never argue with Grandma. He bit his tongue and answered, "Yes, Grandma." Grandma Jones turned to look at Brittany again. "Are you satisfied now?" Brittany took a moment to answer. After she saw Kevin lightly nod his head, she said, "It looks like you have the situation under control." But then she got a serious look on her face and added, "That's all in the past now, but I do have a request." "Please tell me what you have on your mind," Grandma Jones said without thinking. As far as Grandma was concerned, as long as Brittany didn't pursue this matter any further, the family wouldn't suffer, and neither would Jason. Brittany's eyes swept across the room, and she looked at them one by one before she slowly said, "In order to prevent this kind of thing from happening again, Lily will be my contact for any further projects. I don't want to work with anyone else." "What do you mean by this?" Grandma Jones asked in confusion. "Because Lily is the only one that I trust." Brittany didn't even look at Grandma Jones. "Do you agree?" "You have my word," Grandma replied. Even if she didn't like the idea, all she could do at this point was smile and agree. Everybody in the room was jealous of Lily, and even though Brittany's image had taken a hit, she still had the full support of Williams Media and was sure to make a comeback. As long as they were behind her, they would definitely make Brittany famous again, and Lily would have lots of opportunities to earn money on future projects. Just when everyone thought that Brittany had finished, she walked up to Kevin and asked him, "Mr. Williams, what do you think of my solution?" "Very good," Kevin said awkwardly. He didn't expect Brittany to do this. His response made Brittany smile. Then she announced to everyone, "As long as Mr. Williams is satisfied, I guess I can head home." She turned around and slowly walked out of the Jones mansion to her car. Everybody started to whisper to each other. What did I just see? Did Brittany actually ask Kevin for his approval? Grandma Jones almost fell off of her chair. She looked at Kevin in disbelief. "That's funny. Maybe you should get someone to look into this further," Kevin said mockingly. Lily pulled on Kevin's arms and pleaded with him. "Please stop." She didn't want to risk upsetting her family further, especially Grandma Jones. But Kevin had other things on his mind. After bringing in the sound engineers who had sabotaged her premiere, Brittany made Grandma Jones promise that only Lily would work with her from now on. And Grandma gave Jason what she thought was a suitable punishment: house arrest. Before he left, Kevin told the Jones family, "Maybe you should get someone to look into this further." The sarcasm in his voice wasn't lost on them, and it showed on their faces. With Grandma Jones giving him a very dirty look, Kevin slowly walked out of the mansion. Lily trotted out of the front door right behind him and said, "Kevin, wait a second." "What's the matter, my love?" Kevin asked with a smile. Lily blushed a little when Kevin called her that. She gathered herself and asked, "Kevin, tell me honestly, did you already know the truth before you came here? And how do you know Brittany? Why did she call you Mr. Williams?" After hearing Lily's last question, Kevin raised an eyebrow. With a mischievous smile, he replied, "Don't tell me you're jealous." "No, I'm not. Please tell me the truth." Lily didn't know why, but she couldn't look directly into Kevin's eyes. Kevin smiled, shook his head, and said gently, "That's enough. I won't tease you anymore. To tell you the truth, Brittany and I went to school together." "If you were classmates, then why did she call you Mr. Williams? And why did she come over and ask if you were okay with her decision?" Lily searched Kevin's eyes, hoping to see the truth. "I have no idea. Maybe it's because I'm so charming," Kevin answered with a shrug. However, before Lily could press the issue any further, Kevin's phone suddenly rang. Without looking at the caller ID, Kevin said right away, "It must be my boss looking for me. I have to head to work. Take care of yourself." Kevin didn't give Lily a chance to ask any more questions. He just turned around and left. Kevin walked pretty far from the Jones mansion before he took out his phone again. He saw that it was Phoebe calling. Slightly confused, Kevin dialed her number. "Hello, Miss Anderson. Sorry about the delay getting back to you. Is there anything I can help with?" "Kevin, I really need your help. Do you have the time?" Phoebe sounded anxious. "I think I can pull myself away from work. Where are you?" Kevin asked straightforwardly. "I'm at the store. I'll be waiting for you at the door when you get here," Phoebe replied. She wanted to make sure Kevin got a better welcome than last time. After hanging up, Kevin waved down a taxi and got to Anderson Antiques in half an hour. As he paid the fare, he felt something in the pit of his stomach. What was it? He wondered. As soon as Phoebe saw Kevin, she immediately grabbed him by the arm and ushered him through the front door. As they walked toward the middle of the room, they could hear at least 10 of the local antique shop owners arguing loudly.
"This is definitely fake."
Then another one said,
"I'd bet everything I own. This painting is definitely authentic."
Then a third one responded, "You don't know what you're talking about. Just look at the frame. There's no way this is genuine." Kevin squeezed through the crowd and saw a man watching all of this with a distraught look on his face. It was Phoebe's father, Truman Anderson. He was examining a landscape painting very attentively. "Uncle Truman, you've been looking at that painting for so long now. What's your opinion?" When Kevin heard the pleasant voice, he looked around and saw a familiar face, Matilda Jones. "Kevin, what are you doing here?" Matilda asked curiously. Before Kevin could say anything, Phoebe turned to Truman and asked, "Dad, what do you think? Do you want me to ask another appraiser to take a look?" Truman knew more about art history than almost anyone in Chicago. If even he couldn't identify it, how could anyone else do better? Just then, the man who was trying to sell them the painting asked nervously,
"Mr. Anderson, can't you see that this is an authentic landscape? We need a decision right away."
"Please, don't be impatient," Truman replied. "This certainly looks like a 17th century Dutch landscape. However, I'm not familiar with the artist, so it's difficult to come to a conclusion. The material looks authentic, and I can even see the proper copper and iron pigments," he continued, and then paused. "My instincts tells me that this is from the Dutch Golden Age, but I don't recognize the artist. I just can't say it with certainty. Something's not right."
"So you're saying that my painting's a forgery?" the man said angrily.
"I think it might be," Truman replied. He just couldn't give a definite appraisal. The other experts in the room mumbled in agreement.
"Mr. Anderson must know what he's talking about."
While they were all discussing the painting, Kevin slowly walked up and asked, "May I take a look?" One of them spoke up and rudely asked Kevin, "What are you doing? Do you think you know more than one of Chicago's leading experts? You're just going to make a fool of yourself." Matilda heard all these men scoffing at Kevin and looked over to see his reaction. She didn't know him well, but what she did know was that at Grandma Jones's birthday party, he had been able to appraise an 18th century brooch at a glance. He had definitely made an impression on her. But this was different. Even Mr. Anderson thought that the painting was probably a fake. If Kevin made a fool of himself, she might open herself up to ridicule too, especially by her family. Truman looked at Kevin in surprise and then asked, "Aren't you Dorothy Jones's son-in-law?" Phoebe interrupted awkwardly. "Dad, this is the antique appraiser that I brought in as a consultant." When the onlookers heard this, they all started laughing.
"Miss Anderson actually hired this moron as a consultant?"
One of them jeered. Truman looked at his daughter and let out a slow sigh. He'd never seen Kevin before, but he had heard a lot of rumors about him. It was the usual gossip that Jason had been spreading around amongst the members of the Jones family. According to them, Kevin was useless, and they all hoped that he and Lily would get a divorce as soon as possible. But he trusted his daughter. After all, she had been doing a fantastic job with the store. If she had thought that he had something to contribute, Truman was willing to listen. "Please be careful. If it turns out to be a forgery, we don't want to owe this man anything for damages," Truman said. "Don't worry, sir," Kevin replied as he started to study the painting. The atmosphere in the room changed. Everyone watched patiently to see if Kevin would make a fool of himself. Some of them were wondering if Phoebe was still too young to be in such a prominent position in the company. Phoebe started to get nervous. Although she was very confident in Kevin, she wondered if he was making a mistake. After all, her father had just given his own opinion. After only half a minute, Kevin's eyes flashed and he stood up straight with an astonished look on his face. The mumbling and comments from the onlookers started up again. They were all wondering how he could have come to a decision so quickly. But Kevin didn't pay attention to them. He turned around and looked at Phoebe and asked, "How much does he want for it?" Before she had a chance to reply, the man said hurriedly, "200,000. "That sounds about right," Kevin nodded slightly. The rudest of the onlookers said loudly, "Who does he think he is? It's not worth $50. Mr. Anderson already said it was a fake." Matilda was disappointed to see this. Truman let out another sigh and looked at his daughter glumly. "So this is your expert?" If there hadn't been so many people around, he would have scolded his daughter. She was actually paying this guy $150,000 a year? Sure, they could afford it, but he still didn't like to waste money. When Phoebe heard this, she felt awful. How could Kevin have come to a decision so quickly? Did he really know anything? She was starting to have her doubts. Truman looked directly at Kevin and asked him bluntly, "Can you tell me why this thing is worth $200,000? Kevin knew that the painting was worth 10 times that amount, but he hesitated to say it out loud. Instead, he asked Truman, "Have you ever heard of someone named Vermeer?" Truman was stunned by this question. He answered with a hint of indignation in his voice. "Of course I have. One of the finest Dutch masters. But he only painted 2 landscapes in his lifetime. What you're suggesting is impossible." "How could this possibly be a Vermeer?" Truman asked him. The antique dealers surrounding them all had very puzzled expressions, not knowing what the two of them were talking about. Kevin explained, "Look closely at the style, the artist's use of light and shadow. There's a distinctive depth to this piece, and the pigments match Vermeer's preferences too. You can't help but feel some emotion as you look at this landscape." "But he hardly ever painted landscapes," Truman responded excitedly. Kevin interrupted him and appealed to his experience. "Mr. Anderson, take another look, and I'm sure you'll agree. This is a lost Vermeer landscape. I'm certain of it." Truman looked at Kevin in surprise. If this young man was right, this was an extraordinary discovery. After hesitating for a moment, he went back to the painting and took another look. This time, he pulled a magnifying glass out of his suit pocket. Less than a minute later, Truman practically jumped up and down. He shouted, "Mr. Landau, please arrange for this gentleman's payment." The antique dealers who had been watching this spectacle with great interest couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. But seeing Mr. Anderson's excited reaction, they felt very awkward that they had been so rude to Kevin. Matilda looked at Kevin in disbelief. She thought to herself, how could he have identified this painting so easily? Phoebe wasn't quite sure what to think. She asked her father, "Dad, are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. Hurry up before the seller changes his mind," he whispered hurriedly in her ear. The man seemed to be anxious to complete the sale and leave.
"Fine, then go ahead and pay me. I still have other things to do today, and I've already wasted a lot of time here."
Kevin laughed to himself. The man had no idea what he was giving up for only $200,000. He obviously knew nothing about art, just some guy making a quick buck. So how did someone like that get hold of such a valuable piece of art? Kevin really wanted to find out. Truman Anderson, Phoebe's father, was ecstatic. Kevin had correctly identified a lost Vermeer landscape, and the store was sure to see an enormous profit from the deal. Kevin was pleased to have helped, but then he suddenly noticed a few traces of dirt on the painting. Then he recalled that when he bent down to look at the painting, there was a slight moldy scent. Could this painting have been buried somewhere? Kevin thought to himself. Truman was so happy about this find that he hugged Phoebe and said, "Please make sure this gentleman is paid immediately." Then he turned and walked up the stairs to the second floor. While this was going on, Most of the local antique shop owners who had watched the whole scene took out their phones and started looking up the Dutch masters on the internet. When they saw how much the painting was actually worth, they were filled with envy. The seller happily accepted the payment and walked out of the store whistling. After a little while, Truman returned to the showroom. He walked up to Kevin and put a card into his hand. "Kevin, I didn't expect you to be so gifted and discerning. I'm really grateful to you. Please accept this token of my appreciation." "That's very kind of you, Mr. Anderson, but after all, I am one of your employees," Kevin replied with a smile. Of course, he gladly accepted Truman's gift. This bonus was probably nothing compared to the profit that the store could make on the painting. "Phoebe was right about you," Truman said sincerely. "You may be young, but you're an excellent appraiser. Let's have a drink later. My treat." Truman was obviously excited about his newest acquisition. Seeing Kevin's potential, he thought it would be nice to have a talk with him. "Thank you for the kind offer. Unfortunately, I have some things to take care of today. I'll have to take a rain check. We'll get together soon, and it can be my treat," Kevin said while giving him a warm handshake. "All right then, I won't keep you," Truman replied gratefully. "Let's get together soon." Then Kevin headed out the door. Phoebe, Matilda, and the others were surprised to see Kevin leave in such a hurry. Why would he pass up this opportunity to make friends with the company's owner? Kevin wasn't worried about that right now. As soon as he stepped out of the door, he spotted the man who had just sold the painting. "There's something wrong with this guy. I'm sure he dug that priceless painting up somewhere," Kevin thought to himself. Then he tailed him to see where he could be heading. After 2 hours of this, he saw the man go below street level to Wacker Drive, the road that runs under part of downtown Chicago. It's mainly for through traffic and deliveries to keep congestion off the surface streets. Otherwise, things would be an even bigger mess at rush hour. There wasn't much room to walk, but Kevin watched the guy go up to a few men near a loading dock. This was in a part of the underground street that was off the beaten path. Not many prying eyes, except for his. He could hear one of them talk. "Greg, what took you so long? Did you sell that thing?" "I wasted a lot of time in that shop," he said as he pulled out his bank card. "I sold the painting for $200,000, easy money." The one who seemed to be in charge asked him, "Was it worth that much?" "I guess so," Greg answered. "Not bad for a day's work, eh, Johnny?" The other man asked, "Should we head down to the south side again tonight and see what else we can dig up?" Greg was interested in trying again. "Yeah, Max, good idea. Last night we only dug out one painting and got $200,000 for it. Maybe we can find some more good stuff." Kevin, who was hiding in the shadows, heard everything they were saying. He couldn't believe it. Could they be grave robbers? Did anyone still do that? Just then, the head grave robber suddenly looked over to where he was hiding. "Who's over there? Why don't you come a little closer?" Could they have seen me? Kevin wondered. Just as he was about to escape, he heard a woman's voice. "You guys are really bold. Robbing tombs? Aren't you superstitious?" The woman walked out from behind a container less than 10 yards away from Kevin, on the other side of the loading dock. Kevin was stunned to see Officer Emmett. How come he kept running into her in all these different places? "So, who's our visitor? You know you're interrupting a private meeting," Johnny said in a threatening tone. Then he turned to his buddies and said, "She's a beauty, isn't she?"
"Yeah, I like what I see," Greg added. "Why don't you come over here and have a seat?"
Hearing their boorish comments, Officer Emmett started to get a little ticked off. Actually, she'd been aware of this group of thieves for a long time. Early this morning, she caught a break when she spotted them near one of the older cemeteries on the south side. It was pretty much abandoned, so it was surprising to see traffic there, especially so early in the day. She had figured they were up to something, so instead of heading to the station, she followed them here. It had turned out to be a long stakeout while she waited for Greg to come back, but she wanted more proof of how they were fencing their loot. Just as Officer Emmett had suspected, they'd robbed one of the mausoleums that were hidden back in the woods away from the Holy Redemption Cemetery's main entrance. Rumor had it that bootleggers had hidden a lot of their valuables in the cemeteries back in the 1920s. Maybe they had stumbled onto something. She wanted to call for backup, but the cell signal was really crappy down there under the street, especially in her hiding place behind a shipping container. Officer Emmett advised them, "You're under arrest. I've recorded your conversation and thanks for having it out here in public, where I wouldn't need a warrant. If you surrender quietly, I might ask the court to go easy on you." Johnny answered in a creepy tone. "I'll tell you what. Why don't you come with us? It can get pretty lonely down at the cemetery." Max added, "Good idea. I never seen such a pretty cop." In spite of her training in conflict resolution, Officer Emmett was getting irritated. "If you guys keep this up, I'll have to use force." She pulled her badge out of her pocket and informed them, "I'm Lieutenant Kelly Emmett of the Chicago Police Department. You're all under arrest." "I don't care who you are. We don't want you here," Johnny laughed. Then a few more men came out of the shadows and joined them. They started walking towards her. "I order you to stop." Emmett knew she was in trouble and she was kicking herself for not calling for backup. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." Johnny, the group's leader, had a sadistic smile on his face. "But these guys might." She ordered them again. "Stop right there. Don't move." Emmett instinctively reached for her hip, but she wasn't in uniform, so her service weapon was locked up safely at the station. "Great, now what am I going to do?" she anxiously thought to herself. By then, the men had surrounded her. There were 6 of them. Just as Kevin was about to show himself, he saw Officer Emmett knock one of them to the ground with a beautiful sidekick. She moved like lightning. Kevin was impressed with her fighting skills. In less than a minute, 4 or 5 of them were on the ground, either unconscious or writhing in pain. "Pretty good," Johnny said in surprise. She spoke to the 2 robbers who were still standing. "Put your hands on your heads and kneel on the ground." Greg, the one who'd sold the painting to the Andersons, had been lying on the pavement. Emmett thought she had knocked him out, but she was wrong. The man jumped up, pulled out a switchblade, and held it to her throat. "Not today, officer. It looks like maybe we're going to be arresting you instead," Johnny said as he motioned for the others to tie her up with their belts. Officer Emmett began to worry that they were interested in more than robbing graves. Just then, they were all surprised to hear a man's voice from the shadows. "You guys really are scum. Grave robbery is one thing, but what were you thinking of doing to this nice lieutenant, one of Chicago's finest?" They all looked over and saw Kevin deliberately walking out from behind a box truck while he brushed the dust off his clothes. "Kevin?" Officer Emmett exclaimed. "Hurry up and call the police." Kevin heard her but kept moving forward. He didn't have any intention of leaving. "Damn it, Greg, you let someone follow you?" Johnny said in an annoyed tone of voice.
"Boss, don't worry, it's just the appraiser from the antique store."
"An appraiser?" Johnny scoffed. They were all stunned, especially Officer Emmett. "Kevin, run! Just call the police and we'll be fine," she shouted as she struggled against her restraints. "Shut up," Johnny said as he grabbed her mouth and poured in a bottle of pills. "After we deal with him, we'll get back to you," he snarled. Emmett coughed and asked him frantically, "What did you just do?" "Don't be such a killjoy," he answered. "You're going to take a nice nap." Officer Emmett struggled even more intensely when she heard this. "What the hell is wrong with this guy?" Kevin wondered. Then Greg shouted at Kevin.
"You followed me? I sold the painting and you guys bought it. Just business. What do you want now?"
"Don't get excited," Kevin said calmly. "Shouldn't you be thanking me?"
"Why should I be thanking you?"
he shouted. Kevin shook his head and replied, "If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't have gotten a penny for your forgery."
"You saying it was a fake?"
the man asked in shock. Kevin saw the other thugs starting to move towards him. He ripped through them in seconds, tossing the large men left and right.
"Who the hell are you?"
the last man standing asked in horror. Kevin couldn't resist. Gritting his teeth, he snarled, "Who am I? I'm an antiques appraiser." After he said this, the man fainted. Officer Emmett looked like she was in shock. Kevin knelt down next to her and started to remove her restraints. "Are you all right? Do you think you can stand up?" She didn't answer right away. She just shook her head in disbelief. Kevin took the belts and walked over to the unconscious men. He began to search their bodies as he tied them up. Looking through the pockets of the head gangster, Johnny, he found a pill bottle. What the heck is this? Kevin wondered. It could be worse, Officer Emmett said slowly. When he poured the pills in my mouth, he was so distracted by you that I managed to spit most of them out. She nodded over to the gross pile on the pavement. Kevin handed her the bottle so she could take a look at the label. Then she added, Yup, looks like they were tranquilizers. I may have swallowed a couple, but it would still be nice to get an ambulance down here right away. And a couple of squad cars. Can you get a signal down here? She asked him. Kevin nodded and then he took out his phone to call for help. The ambulance will be here soon, Kevin said as he slowly put away his phone. Officer Emmett looked at the 6 men lying on the asphalt tied up with their own belts. Then she stared at Kevin and hesitated for a few seconds before saying, Why are you here? Kevin pointed to one of the men lying on the ground and explained, This guy sold a 17th century Dutch landscape to Anderson Antiques. I had my suspicions, so I followed him here. Officer Emmett believed him and didn't ask any more questions. After an awkward silence, Kevin asked her, I keep running into you, but I still don't know your name. Most people just call me Officer Emmett, she replied quietly. Then she added, Kelly Emmett. Kevin was surprised at this softer side that she was showing. Then Officer Emmett looked at Kevin with a serious expression and said, Tell me honestly, who are you really? Kevin didn't answer right away. He wasn't exactly sure what she meant. After thinking for a while, Officer Emmett rephrased her question. What I mean is, what school of martial arts are you from? Kevin was speechless. It sounded like she was talking about something from the movies. I'm sorry, I don't understand your question, he answered candidly. I know what I saw, Officer Emmett said seriously. When you defeated these men, your moves looked spontaneous, but I saw something deeper in your movements. I've studied martial arts for years, and I studied Eastern philosophy in college. You were keeping something from me. Kevin really didn't know how to respond. Officer Emmett, you stream a lot of kung fu movies in your off time, don't you? Do you still want to play dumb? She said sternly. Didn't you take an oath not to let outsiders see you using your techniques? I have no idea what you're talking about, he assured her. I used to practice some taekwondo when I was a kid. Everything I just did was entirely subconscious. Officer Emmett wasn't buying his explanation. So, you really think I'm mistaken? She muttered to herself. She was so convinced that Kevin started to get curious. Officer Emmett, what did you mean by what you said earlier? Kevin asked. Of course I'm talking about developing your inner power. Don't tell me you really don't know about this. Officer Emmett stared at Kevin while they waited for help to arrive. She continued explaining to Kevin. I've studied a few different martial arts. You saw me use them a little while ago. What's even more interesting to me is the study and development of life energy. A lot of people spend years working on this. You seem to be tapping into it without even trying. But you really should be careful. Without guidance, this can be very dangerous. It's even more important to avoid getting the attention of the people who want to keep all this a secret. This sounds like a comic book or something. Are you kidding me? Kevin asked in disbelief. Trust me, I'm deadly serious, Officer Emmett replied gravely. So are you one of these people? Kevin asked with a faint smile. The ones who are into all this stuff? Officer Emmett didn't answer Kevin's question right away. Her eyes were half closed, but she managed to talk some. There's a lot going on that the average person doesn't know about. And there are some very powerful people who have decided to put their energy into developing businesses, believe it or not. They've become wealthy entrepreneurs, and some of them have very powerful families. Her voice took on a very solemn tone, and she took a deep breath. Even with all her training, the few pills that she'd taken were starting to make her sleepy. They heard sirens approaching. Help was just a few blocks away now. Kevin counted 5 or 6 police cars heading towards them. Looks like the cavalry is here, Kevin said with a smile. Time for me to go. Wait, Officer Emmett said as she struggled to stand up, but she was feeling too sleepy. You're safe, and the grave robbery case has been solved. You know how to reach me if you need a statement. Do I really need to stay? Kevin asked. I'm not asking you to make a statement. I'm asking you to take me home, Officer Emmett said slowly. She wasn't feeling much like talking anymore. Why me? Help just arrived. Don't you want to go with them? Kevin asked in confusion. Don't worry about it. Can you please do this for me? She asked quietly. She didn't want to admit to Kevin that she was embarrassed for letting the gang of robbers get the best of her. She'd never be able to live it down, and it could undermine her authority at the precinct. I guess I could take you home. Do you think you can walk? Kevin asked her. Do you think you could carry me? Emmett asked him. Her voice was barely audible. Kevin nodded and waited for the officers to arrive. Officer Emmett mustered enough strength to give them their orders so they could take the men to the station for processing. Kevin supported her as they walked slowly to her car, which was parked on the street above this underground loading dock. She wasn't very heavy, so nobody suspected just how much Kevin was actually helping her. Kevin managed to get Officer Emmett home safely. He eased her into a recliner in her living room, then he sat down on the sofa and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked around and wondered out loud. What's the average salary in the police department these days? He knew that a house in this neighborhood cost at least $500,000. My mom bought it for me, Officer Emmett said sleepily. She paused for a moment and then asked him, I'm really curious. How did you get your strength? I could feel your power as you carried me in. Before Kevin could reply, she asked him, if you haven't gotten it through any special training, did you have any help from someone? Help? Kevin frowned. He thought of the 2 pills Cook had given him. They were supposed to help him restore his strength. Maybe they did something more. What have those pills done to me? Kevin wondered. If you don't want to tell me, I won't force you. But remember one thing. Try not to let anyone see just how much power you have. Otherwise... Officer Emmett yawned and changed the subject. Sit down and rest for a while. I'm a little tired. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep. I can't believe she trusts me enough to let me in her home like this, Kevin thought to himself. Then he thought again about what Emmett had said. Kevin wondered about the 2 pills Cook had given him, and he quickly took out his phone and called his friend. Cook answered in his deep voice. Hi, Kevin. What's up? Mitch, I want to know what was in those pills you gave me, Kevin said directly. Let me think about it. One of them was supposed to help boost your energy levels, and the other was supposed to help you with your focus, he replied. Then he asked, Why are you suddenly asking me about this? Are you having a problem because of the pills? No, don't worry. I'm fine. Kevin smiled before adding, Just curious. I'll let you get back to work. Then he sent a quick text to his office to have his car dropped off around the corner from Officer Emmett's house. No explanations necessary. It's good to be the CEO, he thought. Kevin put his phone back in his pocket and looked back at Officer Emmett, who was sleeping soundly in her recliner. He sat back and looked around the room while he wondered what was going on in his body. His eyes fell on the top shelf of her bookcase. There were a lot of martial arts books, guides to natural health, but there were also a couple of old books with tattered spines. Kevin walked over and took them down. The first one he opened was a very old translation of an ancient book on training your ki, your inner power. He was surprised to find that it talked a lot about what Officer Emmett had been saying about training your internal energy. It was a quick read, maybe because of his recent improvement in his focus. Kevin put that book aside and flipped open another one. It talked about the yin and yang, negative and positive energy, and harmony, as well as some ways to make natural medications. Kevin lost track of time and read throughout the night. When Officer Emmett woke up and saw that Kevin was still there, she immediately jumped up from her chair. Why haven't you left yet? Well, you asked me to bring you back here, and then you fell asleep. How could I let you sleep alone in the living room? What if those guys have accomplices and they want to harm you? Kevin explained. Even so, it wasn't appropriate, she said, looking slightly embarrassed. It can be our little secret, Kevin said while leaning back on the sofa. He didn't look like someone who had been up all night. On the contrary, he looked very energetic. Kevin suddenly remembered the pills that Officer Emmett had been forced to swallow the day before, and he asked her, with the concern showing in his voice, How are you doing now? It was only a couple of them. I keep myself in pretty good shape, so I think I'm getting over it, she replied. I just wish I could have developed my internal energy more, like in those books you've been reading, she said as she nodded at the pile of old books that Kevin had taken down from her shelf. "Oh, I'm sure it isn't all that hard," Kevin teased her. Officer Emmett raised an eyebrow. She felt that he didn't know just how long that kind of training could take. "You wouldn't understand if I told you. Anyway, I think it's time for you to leave," she said impatiently. "I have to go to work." Kevin just sat there with a cryptic smile on his face. "Why aren't you leaving yet? Do you want me to call a squad car for you or something?" Her annoyance was starting to show. "I've got something here and I hope it can help you," Kevin said as he slowly took a reddish-brown pill from his pocket. Last night, Kevin had followed the instructions in the book on alternative medicine to come up with something he thought could help Officer Emmett recover more quickly. "Did you use one of the herbal recipes in that book? What's it supposed to do?" Officer Emmett asked. You could tell she had her doubts, but for some reason she trusted Kevin. She was tempted to try it.